we want to just remember a few things. The other D-Day, we talked about D-Day the other day, which is the invasion of Normandy against the Nazis and the French in the French beaches there. But the other D-Day in Saipan, the Mariana Islands, largest Mariana Islands there, and that was June 15th. So it was the 80th anniversary, June 15, 1944. It went all the way to July 9th, 1944, until the American troops were able to secure the island because the Japanese were attacking. Actually, it was like almost like suicide attacks. So we're coming on to the American forces, and they eventually were able to secure the island, and they were able to launch attacks from there into Japan. But they were Japanese students, there were American students, there were even Australian students everywhere to remember and commemorate the 80th anniversary and how horrible the war was. And that's one thing the mayor of Saipan was making sure that the young people knew how horrible war was, how many people lost their lives in a war that should not have happened. But David, I'll turn it over to you. 80 years, D-Day, Normandy, the other D-Day in Saipan. You've been there. Tell us about it.
Yep. Well, when I was in the 5th grade, took a class trip over to Saipan, landed on the very same airstrip that was coral, crushed coral at the time, made by the sea beach there. And so we learned about the horror of war that was there. So they've been doing these trips a long time now, but then it was just American and Guamanians on my trip. But now they're trying to make it an international. And Saipan was very bloody. But Guam was bloody too, which
That's
was
right.
the island before. And if most people, if you know World War II history, why'd they have to drop the bomb? They were defeated. No, the generals told the soldiers to fight to the end, do not let any prisoners go, and kill them. So they had this mentality that they could never surrender. Okay. And when you saw these wars, you saw troops, the Japanese troops fighting to the end, suicide charges, no enemy, coming with just swords against machine guns and flamethrowers and all this. And then also there's pictures of the Japanese civilians going to the cliffs in Guam and jumping off.
That's right.
Suicide. You know,
That's
it
right.
was just fight to the end. There is no surrender. And so this Saipan becomes the stepping stone that now we could fly direct to Tokyo, Japan from our islands, and we could build it up. Now we had clear access to rearm planes for daily bombing raids. There were over 500 Japanese cities burned by, in the way Dresden was burned with fire bombs. But before we hit them with the nuclear weapon, but many of these came off of the island there in Saipan. In fact, the Enola Gray loaded the nuclear bomb there and took off from there.
Wow.
So it's an important island. It was an important fight, and a lot of good men died taking this to put a stop to the it was the Marianas Islands was the true beginning of the end for the war. Midway was the turning point, but now we had an open door.
Yeah, so from there we were able to go into, it was like used as an air base for the raids, and then of course
there was
September 2nd.
Yeah, there was no stopping the bombings now because generally the Air Force of the Japanese had been devastated, and all the pilots, they did have pilots that became kamikazes, but they were untrained young men, you should fly level, then try to dive on and hit something.
Yeah.
Well, I think with the Battle of Midway, what you see is most of the veteran pilots died in that battle.
Yes, that's correct.
And then when you got to the Marianas, the American pilots called it the Marianas turkey shoot, because they would send like pilots with less than 100 hours against these veteran American pilots. And so these kids who have never flown a Zero before would just be shot down almost instantly by the Americans.
Yeah.
And then also, if you remember, we had the introduction of the Hellcat.
Correct. It was an upgrade for
more powerful engine. Yeah, they had learned to fight the Zeros with the old
Buffaloes.
yeah, and so now they had a weapon that could just destroy everything. So
Yeah. Of course, Japan surrendered about a year and a few months later, September 2nd, 1945. So that was a great turning point. And David, I wanted to ask you this because the mayor of Saipan was just letting these kids know how horrible war was. But then you turn on the news and you realize, does man learn anything from history? I mean, a horrible war, but do we learn anything? Because you turn on any news that is viable or even worth watching, and what do you see? Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine using German tanks, Ukraine using U.S. weapons to attack Russian targets in Russian territory. You see Putin wanting to side with North Korea and China and other places for nuclear weapons. You see NATO wanting to get these nuclear, basically out of storage, nuclear heads out of storage. We just talked about how horrible Saipan was. Don't we learn anything?
well, those that forget history are condemned to repeat it.
That's right.
Those that don't remember the past or history are condemned to repeat it. And so this is what's happened. The whole world has forgotten what World War is like. 75 years plus is enough to forget everything.
That's right.
And we're marching to the same drumbeat down
Yeah.
the path to war.
Yeah, the
You
same
said there would be wars and rumors of wars, and we're seeing everywhere.
Yeah, it is an escalation for sure. I was reading Luke 21 yesterday about what Jesus warned about these things. There will be wars and rumors of wars, as well as Matthew. And Jesus was talking about the multiplication of all these scenarios that we see today. That they've always been, and this is where a lot of people look side of prophecy because they say, well, they've always been. What's the point? What's the point of me talking about it? Or you have preterists who say that already happened, that all these things already happened in 70 AD. So they really don't know the time. And what Paul the Apostle told the church in Rome is knowing the time, to wake up out of your sleep and know what's going on. And David, this is Poland, Romania are told by the Biden administration that they cannot have Patriot missiles because it's all going to Ukraine. So they're a little bit upset about it because their defense against Russia, which are nearby to Russia, are now vulnerable because it's all being funneled into Ukraine. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it is making our allies in NATO vulnerable, but even them are shipping stuff. Now we have Germany shipping things to Ukraine. France has. So Ukraine is a war, but now Mr. Putin is probably quite embarrassed about not being able to finish this war. Thus, he's going to Korea to get more weapons. He's getting an ally on his backside there, hoping that Vietnam can help him out. But it's just, before, Marco, you would have a war and wars and wars in different places throughout history. But then we came into the 20th century and we had a couple world wars.
Yeah.
Okay. Expanded things, but they weren't really true world wars. I mean, yes, it was, across the northern continents and everything, but now we're having wars not only in the Middle East, but looks like wars in the Far East and even the possibility of war coming to America.
That is one thing I don't think Americans realize how this thing really is.
We've got hypersonic missiles in Cuba.
Yeah.
Minutes away from America. And Patriot missiles can't be fired fast enough to stop hypersonic missiles.
Not hypersonic missiles, you're right.
I have a better question. Since the border doesn't exist, how do we know that Russians haven't made it into the U.S.?
Yeah, tactical nuclear ones, dirty bombs.
I would say you can't even assume that. You have to assume they are. We have tens of thousands of Chinese-aged men in the country. A fifth brigade.
Yep.
Fifth column. Absolutely. Now you have this conference, which is to me was a joke. It's called the Swiss Peace Conference. It was just this past week. One of the key speakers was Zelensky. it was a peace conference, but all they talked about is arming Ukraine and how they're going to defeat Russia. David, they shed some light into this. It's a peace conference. Putin offers a peace conference, and I know some people didn't like what he offered and things like that, and I get it. It was one-sided seemingly, but at least something's on the table. You can go to him and say this, and this. You can't do this, that, and that. But instead, it's no, a hard no, and we're going to arm our allies, NATO, and we're going to give more to Ukraine so they can fight into Russian territory. What's the peace conference all about?
Arming Ukraine and dragging the world into war. I mean, if there's any peace, it has to have two sides. Mr.
Right.
Putin's laid it.
Yeah, he laid it down. I think he lost it.
Ukraine. He's not giving nothing back. He's just, look, as we've said before here, he's rolling out his nuclear missiles. Europe is telling its citizens to store up food. Well,
Yeah.
why? Oh, because you might have shortages. You might have supply chains interruption.
Oh.
You might have things like, limited nuclear war there.
Yeah.
Could be.
Denmark is the newest country that is warning its citizens. Denmark is telling its citizens to stock up on water, food, medicine. Not only them, but there was Poland, there was Germany, there was even Great Britain that was alerting their citizens. So, David, this is not an isolated case where maybe one country it's being maybe hyper responsive to this, but it's several of them. It's all of them. Perhaps even Sweden. Rolling out there, this is how you get into a shelter and all that. So
Finland's done that. Yeah.
It's not looking for peace.
Nobody's looking for peace. And it is interesting, Marco. There's a military outfit from America whose name, it starts with a D. My name, I just forget. But they created for 2025 a population reduction estimate. And it's quite crazy about how America, they said, will go from 300 million to 147 million. The amount of less in China, amount of less in all over the world. Population reduction that's crazy. But why would the military want to know these things? Why are they predicting these things? Well, if everybody knows war's coming, that has the power to wage war, it should tell people something about what is coming in the possibilities. I mean, we know if the seals start to be opened, that at one point, that 1/4 of the world's population will be given up to the Antichrist for destruction in war.
Yeah, the seals. Yeah, you're talking about the seals. And
if they open and if this is that time.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, David, because people are just really freaked out about this. I mean, the ones that know, the ones that are paying attention, there's people that don't want to come out of their houses, incredible depression, incredible anxiety because of this. I remember reading a report, I think it was during the World War II, I think it was, where people didn't even know didn't want to know that the world was over, and they would hide in bunkers. They wouldn't come out of their home. There were husbands whose wives were in shelters. They didn't want to come home because they were so afraid of a nuclear war. And we're starting to see that again in society. Just the ones that are aware are becoming frantic. And then there's those that are completely unaware. They're living their lives as if nothing is going on. So, David, how we're to bring those together, to be aware, knowing the time, Paul says. Jesus says, when these things happen, lift up your head. There's awareness of what's going on, yet we're commanded not to fear, commanded to trust God, commanded to go on with our great commission, which should be our first priority. So balance that out for us where people see, I have a son, I have a daughter, and they know, am I going to go to war? Am I going to send my kids to war? And yet having to trust the Lord and keep focus on what he called us to do.
Well, that's what we're supposed to do. Okay. And I mean, most Christians we have to understand truly, we have a future. This is not the end, no matter what the world does to us. There's a saying Jacob says, plan for the future, just don't count on it.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
But we do have a future. We do have a future for 7 years that the earth is going to exist, and then 1,000 after that, and then for the ages to come. So eternal life, we've already positionally entered eternal life. Okay, so people have to know that if we were to die, the first thing you're going to realize is you're alive, right? And so we don't want to fear. We do want to live our lives. We want to try to make provisions as best we can for the coming days. And if things get darker, of course. But at the same time, I think somebody said there's 365 times in the Bible, maybe one for every day.
Yeah, 365. That's right. The English Bible.
Or
Fear.
do not fear.
Yeah.
And death has no sting for us. So that should be, God has given us a spirit of boldness, and we have to live into this. And God's given us a sound mind. So unlike I'm seeing people saying the stress on women right now is so bad.
Oh yeah.
Of everything going on in the world. They want to drop out of society. They're having trouble just coping, which, but we have to now is the time to get back into the word. Now is the time to just renew. If you've been drifting from the Lord, if you've been just lukewarm, ask him to fire you up so that you can be ready for the coming days. He's ready. He's waiting for you. So do what it takes to be of a sound mind, or to start talking to your kids, start talking to your family. Time is short. Don't hold back, but do it lovingly.
Yeah. And yeah, go ahead, Danny.
Oh, yeah. I just, I thought you were going to say, David, God has given us a sound mind, unlike Biden.
Oh,
Yeah, well, he does not have a sound mind, but I would not, and I'm just speculating, would not be afraid to say that he very well may be demonically charged, as well as many in the world, because we see the overlying spirit over all these countries and the craziness of them speaking of a world war when we have nuclear weapons that could wipe out the whole world. How will this it'll change everything,
I think that's what makes it partly different this time too.
Yeah.
These world leaders, they're not of a sound mind. They're not rational.